In the heart of a galaxy ruled by the cold logic of alien empires, a message spread like wildfire. It has been born. They didn't say what. They only whispered the species. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was human. And every empire, every council, every warlord began to tremble. They said the child was born in Sector Zeta 4, on a forgotten world tucked between asteroid belts and cosmic debris. No cities, no ships, just a quiet moon with a silent womb. The scout who saw the child first never returned, his last transmission garbled by panic, the word eyes repeated dozens of times before the signal went black. Soon, fleets were dispatched, not to protect, but to contain. Dozens of species, all with histories of war and conquest, united in fear. They didn't understand why this infant, barely able to walk, sent waves of unease through their minds. But ancient instinct whispered, this is no ordinary birth. This is a spark. The child had no army, no allies, no weapons. But everywhere she looked, things changed. Machines stopped working. Storms gathered unnaturally. Those who got too close began dreaming, and in their dreams, they saw Earth, a place none had ever visited, yet it haunted them like a lost home. By the time she turned 5, entire fleets had vanished. Planets went dark. Empires collapsed from within, not by force, but by emotion, grief, rage, love, things no alien species truly understood, yet suddenly felt an unbearable intensity after just one glance from the child. Some said she spoke without speaking. Others claimed she never blinked. But all agreed she remembered things she should never know. One alien scholar, old and blind, dared to approach her alone. He knelt before the child in peace. When he returned, he wept for the first time in 300 years. She showed me my mother's face. He whispered, I don't have a mother. My kind are cloned. That's when the truth began to spread. This child wasn't just human. She was pure human, untouched by Earth's violence or noise. Born in silence, raised by instinct. She was what humans could have been if left to evolve under stars instead of smoke. The Galactic Council called her a reality anomaly. But soldiers called her something simpler, the end. Because wherever she went, wars stopped. Not because she killed, but because she made killing feel like heartbreak. But not all were ready to bow to peace. The Zorkai warlords, conquerors of 17 galaxies, believed fear could overwrite anything, even humanity. They sent a dreadnought the size of a small moon, loaded with neural disruptors, psionic dampeners, and weapons designed to erase thought itself. Their mission was simple: annihilate the child before she reached adolescence. They never made it to the surface. Some say the ship was torn apart mid-warp. Others claim the crew turned the weapons on themselves. But those who analyzed the black box found one final log. The captain's voice, shaking, broken, whispered one word. She forgave us. And then silence. Forgiveness. That was a thing they couldn't process. Not with data. Not with logic. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't defense. It was simply unbearable. Forgiveness from someone who had every reason to hate them. That's what shattered them. Galactic religion sprouted overnight, some calling her the empath, others the last dawn. The child, now 8, didn't speak much. But when she did, her voice rippled through dimensions. Not loud, not powerful, but true. She asked questions that cracked empires. Why do you fear what you hurt, and why do you hurt what you fear? One world tried to worship her. They built a palace of diamond and starlight. She dismantled it with a thought. I don't need thrones, she said. I need stories. She wondered. She listened. She touched the ruins of battlefields and made flowers grow from ash. Not because of magic, but because where she stepped, memories awakened. Weapons turned to dust, because those who held them finally remembered who they once were. By her 10th birthday, she reached Earth. It had been silent for a century. Bombed. Broken. Lost to time. But the child walked its dead soil barefoot, her eyes glistening not with power, but longing. She found a ruined library beneath rubble, and there, among torn pages and burned books, she found a photograph of a woman holding a baby. The woman had her eyes. She smiled for the first time in years. Aliens watched from orbit, terrified to intervene. She knelt in the date, cradling that old picture. "I was born from fear," she whispered, "but I am made of hope." That sentence echoed in deep space sensors. Ships drifted to a halt. Civil wars paused. The galaxy held its breath. And then she disappeared. No ship launched. No trace left. Just silence and a feeling that somewhere in the stars the child still wondered. Not as a threat, not as a god, but as a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe is a human heart unafraid to feel. Years passed. Empires that once ruled with fire and iron began changing in quiet ways. Borders faded. Weapons were melted into monuments. Old enemies built homes beside each other, not because they suddenly trusted one another, but because she had shown them what it meant to feel again. The child's name was never known. Not truly. Some said it was written in the stars. Others believed she never had one. To name her would be to limit her, and what she was could not be contained in syllables or languages. She had become a myth wrapped in memory, but her impact was anything but fiction. Children across the galaxy began dreaming of Earth. Not the broken, ruined Earth that once burned, but a green and blue world teeming with life. They painted its skies in colors they had never seen, spoken words their ancestors never taught. Human emotions began to take root in species that had never known laughter, sorrow, or joy. Entire civilizations wept for the first time, not from pain, but because they finally understood what it meant to be alive. The Drow Consortium, once a brutal collective of slavers, dissolved overnight. The elders declared, "We saw her in our sleep. She didn't command us. She invited us to become something more." Billions were freed. The ancient automaton world of Zenthos, which had been calculating the meaning of existence for 90,000 years, stopped at processing algorithms. Its central AI simply said, "She smiled at me. That was enough." Not all were inspired. In the cold shadows of dying stars, a few still plotted. They whispered of rebuilding walls, creating weapons immune to empathy. But those factions failed again and again, not because a child returned to stop them, but because their own people refused to follow. You see, once the galaxy had tasted humanity, true humanity, not just its wars or its fire, but its soul, they couldn't go back. And so her legend spread, no longer a warning, not a weapon, but a question passed down through generations. What if the thing you fear the most is the very thing that can save you? And in every corner of the galaxy, in the hearts of the broken, the cool, the forgotten, that question echoed. And far away, in a place no telescope could see, beneath skies untouched by starlight, a child walked barefoot through flowers that grew without seeds. Still silent, still alone, but never forgotten, because the galaxy would always remember. The child they feared was human. Even as centuries passed, her story never faded. Not in the minds of scholars, not in the coded dreams of machines, not in the lullabies whispered to alien children at night. Her presence had become a gravitational force in culture, in memory, in myth. Some claimed to see her in reflections. Others swore they felt her footsteps in their bones when peace settled over their worlds. 1,000,000 planets adopted Earth's old languages, not out of nostalgia, but because those words carried weight. Words like home, forgiveness, love. These were sounds once considered primitive. Now they were sacred. The Galactic Archives established a forbidden vault simply labeled Project Humanity. But people broke in not to steal, but to learn. They read the old books, listened to lost songs, watched flickering images of children running through sunlit fields. They didn't understand all of it, but they felt it, and that was enough. Some questioned, had she ever been real? Or was she just a story, created to calm the galaxy's wounded soul? But the signs were always there. A destroyed war satellite found drifting in deep space, its hull carved with a child handprint. A dying sun reignited suddenly after going cold, just as an old human lullaby echoed across the void. Entire species waking up with tears they couldn't explain. And always the dreams. Billions across species would see the same vision. A girl standing alone under a tree with golden leaves, looking up at a sky full of stars and smiling. She never aged in those visions, never spoke. She just watched, as if waiting, as if hoping, because maybe, she knew something no one else did. That one day, humanity would rise again, not as conquerors, not as survivors, but as guides. That someone, somewhere, would carry the spark forward. A new child, a new voice, a new dream. And when that day comes, the galaxy won't fear them. They'll welcome them, because the first one taught them how to feel, how to change, how to live. And that's why, even now, in the deepest corners of the universe, when someone says they're afraid of humans, the bravest souls smile and answer softly, "Don't be." The child was human too. Far beyond the spiral arms of the Milky Way, in the space between galaxies where gravity grows thin and silence reigns eternal, a listening station drifted. It was old, forgotten by most, built by hands long turned to dust. Its sensors had been offline for ages, but somehow one signal still blinked. Just a pulse. Steady, calm, familiar. It had no origin, no coordinates. It simply existed, as if space itself remembered her heartbeat. Scientists and prophets alike studied it. Some thought it was a natural anomaly. Others believed it was a soul, echoing in the fabric of the cosmos. The pulse never changed. But when a lost human child, the firstborn in over 200 years, was found on a mining colony at the edge of the Perseus expanse, the signal blinked twice. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the caretakers knew better. The child was different. She never cried, never laughed, but her eyes were exactly like hers. Wide, deep, ancient. And when the galaxy heard her speak for the first time, 100 worlds stopped spinning for just a second. She said, "Where's my story?" As if her life wasn't just beginning, but continuing. As if she had been here before. No one trained her. She needed no school. The stars seemed to teach her directly, whispering through solar winds and gravitational waves. She listened to the silence and answered back with songs no one had heard in eons. Her presence didn't bring fear. It brought stillness, focus, meaning. Leaders bowed to her, not because of power, but because when she looked at them, they remembered who they used to be, before the blood, before the greed, before the fear. They remembered being human. And so, the galaxy began again, not from scratch, but from memory, from feeling, from that sacred, fragile thing buried deep in every being, no matter their shape, skin, or stars. Hope. The rebirth did not come in fire or thunder. It came in whispers, in small, careful steps. Not all at once, but like morning sunlight filtering through the ruins of a long-forgotten cathedral. The new child, no name given, no name needed, did not seek to lead. She simply was, and that, somehow, was enough. Where she walked, old machines flickered back to life, not through touch or command, but because they recognized her, not as their master, but as their memory. Programs designed to forget war began rewriting themselves, building instead, creating instead, healing instead. Entire alien species, once fractured by centuries of fear, began traveling to the place she had been found. Not to colonize, not to conquer, but to sit in silence near the soil she once touched, as if the ground itself remembered what peace felt like. The Council of Nine, once the most feared political body in the known universe, was dissolved without a single shot fired. Its members simply stood up and walked away during a session. Why? Because that morning, every one of them had dreamed of Earth, of a child's hand reaching out, not to take power, but to offer grace. In her absence, no one declared themselves ruler. No flags were raised. No monuments were built. Instead, stories were told. In every corner of space, children were taught the tale, not as propaganda, not as scripture, but as something older, something truer, a reminder that the smallest voice can echo across galaxies, that the softest heart can bend the hardest empires. And across the black sea of stars, deep in the void where no light had shone for millennia, something stirred. Not a threat, not a weapon, but a seed, buried long ago by those who came before, watched over by the quiet hum of forgotten satellites. It pulsed once, just once, as if waking from a deep sleep, and on a screen so old its glass was scarred with time, for words appeared. She is not alone. The signal pulsed again, this time stronger, more deliberate, Observatories in distant systems picked it up, though they couldn't trace its origin. It wasn't a message in any known language, but those who heard it felt something ancient stir in their blood. Some collapsed into tears. Others stood frozen in awe. A few simply smiled, as if remembering a dream they thought had been lost forever. On a moon orbiting the dead husk of a red giant, archaeologists unearthed something impossible, a chamber older than the galaxy itself. Inside, etched into walls that seemed to shimmer between matter and memory, were carvings of humans. Not crude stick figures or imagined aliens, but actual human faces, drawn with such reverence that it silenced every being who laid eyes on them. None could explain how a structure older than recorded time bore images of a species that had only just emerged from its cradle. But the symbols were clear. Beside every figure was a star, a system, a location. One of them matched Earth. And then, at the very center of the chamber, a single phrase glowed faintly, not in words, but in emotion directly felt by those present. They were the first fire. Galactic historians panicked. How could humanity be first, when the record said they were last? A forgotten footnote in a universe already old? Questions were asked. Theories unraveled. Old empires began to tremble again, not in fear of destruction, but in fear of truth. Because if humans were not the accident, if they were not the anomaly, then perhaps they were the architects. Perhaps the child wasn't the savior, but a reminder. And across 1,000 sectors, old relics long thought inert began to awaken. Monoliths, engines, beacons, all once buried, now glowing with gentle, golden light. They responded not to commands, not to technology, but to presence, human presence. Ships sent to investigate would not enter. Doors would not open for machines or synthetics. But when the second child, the girl with the unblinking eyes and the ageless calm, stood before one of them, the monolith bowed. Not literally, but the metal itself bent slightly, like a tree caught in a sacred wind. And then, for the first time in galactic history, the monolith spoke, not aloud, but inside every mind within range. Welcome home. Word spread fast, faster than light, faster than thought. The monoliths had spoken, and what they said shattered the galaxy's deepest assumptions. Welcome home. Those two words carried weight that couldn't be measured by gravity or law. They were a key, unlocking something long buried, not just in space, but in memory. Species that once ruled sectors with iron and plasma suddenly found themselves unmoored. Who were they, if not the first? What power truly built the foundations they stood upon? And what had they forgotten? On the planet Ithari Prime, a council of ancient minds, crystalline beings who recorded time itself, reviewed fragments long sealed away. They had once dismissed the Earth pulse as background noise. Now they realized it was a pattern, a kind of heartbeat hidden within the fabric of space-time. It wasn't just coming from one place, it was coming from everywhere, a woven memory through creation itself. And at the center of it all, the child. She had not returned to Earth. She wandered still, now across dormant systems, touching broken relics, whispering into long-dead code. She awakened ruins not with power, but with presence. Technology older than stars turned itself on just to hear her voice. Ancient ships, embedded in asteroid shells of millennia, suddenly lifted, aligned, and waited. Waited for something. She never explained herself, never led, never commanded, but others began to follow. Children born in distant colonies started showing signs, not of power, but of remembrance. They spoke in languages never taught, dreamed of oceans they'd never seen, drew maps of solar systems that had not been charted in thousands of years. And they all shared one thing, eyes. That same distant calm, that same unbearable depth. The Council of Remnants, a gathering of the galaxy's last surviving first-generation species, convened in desperation. If humanity was here first, they asked, why did they vanish? And more importantly, why are they returning now? The answer came not from a prophet or machine, but from a child, a small boy from the frozen mining rings of Karen 6. He had never spoken a word in his life, but when he stepped into a room with a fragment of the monolith, he looked up and said clearly, because we promised to come back when they were ready. The room fell silent. No one asked who they were, because deep down, every being in that chamber knew. It was them, the entire galaxy, Every race that had lost its way in greed, in conquest, in fear. Humanity had not been destroyed. They had stepped away. And now, they were returning. Not to rule, not to punish, but to remind, because the fire they had lit long ago was dying, and someone had to carry the flame again. They began to call them the children of Sol, not because they claimed lineage or bloodlines, but because they carried a light, something that felt like warmth in a universe that had grown too cold. From the ice worlds of the outer rings to the core world palaces of the highborn, the children began to appear, quiet, unassuming, but unmistakably human. And they didn't fight with weapons. They changed the world simply by being there. Trade wars that spanned decades collapsed in days after a child simply stood silently at a negotiation table. The rival parties began weeping. Neither knew why. On distant moons, execution orders were rescinded when guards looked into the eyes of a boy and remembered the brothers they had lost. Entire prisons were emptied because inmates no longer wanted to fight. The galaxy didn't understand what was happening, only that it was unstoppable, gentle, terrifying, and far beyond the edge of charted space, something watched. It had no name. It had no form. It was a presence, older than the stars, birthed not in fire but in fear. It had once thrived in chaos, feeding on the division of civilizations. It had whispered in the ears of conquerors, inspired genocides, stoked war that burned whole systems. And it remembered them. The first fire. The humans had been its only defeat, not because they had greater power, but because they refused to lose themselves. When they had walked away, it had rejoiced, thinking they were gone forever. But now, the children had returned. The darkness stirred. It reached out in subtle ways, twisting minds, distorting memories, rewriting old truths. It infiltrated the councils, the guilds, the temples, spreading the same old lie. Fear them. Fear the fire. Fear what they awaken in you. And for the first time since her birth, the girl felt it. She stood alone on a world without name, a world of shifting dust and ancient bones, and she looked up, not in wonder, but in knowing. Her expression didn't change. She didn't blink, but her voice carried across solar winds and frozen moons into the hearts of the other children. Something is coming, she said softly. Something that fears us more than it fears death. The children didn't panic. They simply began to walk, toward each other, across systems, across time, across gravity itself. They weren't an army. They were a reminder, a return, and the fire that had once sparked the stars was about to burn again.